the ground, now, don't move!
What is this about?
I don't care what you say you are. Around here, I give the orders. You probably bought that badge online, boy.
I am Deputy U.S. Marshal Elijah Drummond. Check my credentials.
You don't belong here. I don't care who you are. Move.
At 6:14 a.m. on a quiet residential street in suburban Virginia, Deputy U.S. Marshal Elijah Drummond was loading his duty bag into the back of his SUV. He was 43 years old, dressed in a navy polo and pressed slacks, heading to the federal courthouse for a fugitive task force briefing he had attended every Monday morning for the past 6 years. The street was still. Sprinklers ticked across lawns. A few porch lights glowed in the early gray. It was the kind of neighborhood where nothing ever happened. Then, 4 black SUVs with ICE enforcement and removal operations markings rolled onto Birchwood Lane and stopped in a staggered formation that blocked both ends of the street. 6 agents stepped out in tactical vests, sidearms drawn or resting on holsters, moving with the kind of aggressive urgency reserved for high-value fugitive operations. The lead agent, Supervisory Detention and Deportation Officer Vincent Harlow, 46, crossed the pavement in 5 hard strides, pointed directly at Elijah, and shouted, "Get on the ground, now!" No warrant was produced, no name was called, no address was confirmed. No questions were asked, just a black man standing in his own driveway in a neighborhood where, in Harlow's eyes, he didn't belong. Elijah turned slowly, his hands visible, his expression calm but alert. His training was already working. He scanned the agents, counted the weapons, measured the distance to his front door where his wife and 2 sons were still sleeping. He did not reach for anything. He did not raise his voice. He said 4 words. "What is this about?" Harlow didn't answer. What none of them knew, what none of them had bothered to check, was that mounted beneath the eaves of Elijah's home were 4 high-definition security cameras, audio-enabled, motion-activated, recording everything from the moment the first vehicle turned onto the street. Every word, every movement, every second of what was about to happen was already being preserved. Elijah Drummond had spent 21 years in federal law enforcement. He started at 22 as a correctional officer at a federal detention center in North Carolina, working double shifts in maximum security units where inmates tested every new guard who walked the tier. He lasted 3 years, earned a reputation for being unshakable, and applied to the U.S. Marshal Service. He was accepted on his first try. Over the next 18 years, he climbed through the ranks with the kind of steady, unspectacular discipline that defined the best federal officers. He worked prisoner transport, courthouse security, and witness protection assignments before landing on a district fugitive task force that operated alongside the FBI, DEA, and ATF. He had personally arrested more federal fugitives than most agents would see in an entire career. The Department of Justice had commended him twice, once for a multi-state manhunt that ended without a single shot fired, and once for a protective detail he ran for a federal judge who had received credible death threats. At home, he lived in a 4-bedroom house on Birchwood Lane with his wife Corinne, 40, a school principal known across the district for turning around 2 underperforming elementary schools. Their sons, Nolan, 14, and Isaiah, 11, played football and brought home honor roll certificates that covered half the refrigerator door. The Drummonds were one of 3 black families on the block. Their neighbors knew them, respected them. Elijah coached youth football on weekends and helped organize the annual block party every 4th of July. He was, by every measure anyone cared to use, the kind of man who represented the absolute best of federal service. And none of that mattered to the 6 agents standing in his driveway, because they never asked. Vincent Harlow had been in federal immigration enforcement for 18 years, starting with the former Immigration and Naturalization Service before it was folded into ICE under the Department of Homeland Security. In that time, he had built a reputation that depended entirely on who you asked. His supervisors called him driven and results-oriented. His peers used different words: aggressive, territorial, impossible to check. He ran his field unit like it answered to no one, rarely coordinating with other federal agencies, often launching operations based on tips that were vague, unverified, or outright wrong. 7 formal complaints had been filed against him over 12 years. 4 alleged racial profiling during community enforcement sweeps, with residents describing stops that had no legal basis and targeted people based on skin color alone. 2 involved excessive force during arrests, including one where a detained man suffered a dislocated shoulder after Harlow wrenched his arm behind his back during a compliant surrender. The 7th complaint alleged that Harlow had falsified details in an operational report to justify a warrantless entry into a private home. Every single complaint was investigated internally. Every single one was closed with no sustained findings. Harlow had learned the same lesson that men like him always learned when the system refused to correct them: that he could do whatever he wanted. His team reinforced that belief. Officer Dwayne Pettis, 34, had been with ICE for 6 years and had spent the last 3 assigned directly under Harlow. He followed orders without hesitation, backed every report without question, and had never once filed a dissenting account of any operation. The 4 remaining agents in the unit operated the same way: quiet, compliant, unwilling to challenge the man who controlled their schedules, their evaluations, and their careers. Harlow had never been suspended, never been demoted, never been forced to answer for the damage his operations left behind. He had operated for nearly 2 decades without a single real consequence. That morning on Birchwood Lane, standing in a Deputy U.S. Marshal's driveway with no warrant in his hand and 6 cameras recording his every move, that streak was about to end. Harlow closed the distance between himself and Elijah in 3 steps, his right hand resting on the grip of his holstered sidearm, his left hand pointing at the ground. "I said get down. Show me ID. Now." Elijah stood still. His hands were open at his sides, fingers spread, posture deliberately non-threatening. Every instinct built over 2 decades of federal law enforcement told him exactly what was happening and exactly how to survive it. "I'm a federal law enforcement officer," Elijah said. His voice was calm, measured, the tone of a man who had talked down armed fugitives in rooms far more dangerous than his own driveway. "I need to know what this is about." Harlow ignored him. "Put your hands on the vehicle. Turn around." Elijah didn't move. "Is there a warrant?" Harlow's jaw tightened. "We're conducting an immigration enforcement operation. You match a target description." "What target?" Elijah asked. "What name? What address?" Harlow said nothing. Behind Elijah, Pettis moved into position, cutting off the path to the front door. The 4 other agents spread across the driveway in a loose half-circle, hands on belts, eyes locked on the one man they had all apparently decided was the threat. Elijah looked directly at Harlow. His voice did not waver. "I am Deputy U.S. Marshal Elijah Drummond. My credentials are inside my vehicle. My badge is in my duty bag. You are standing in my driveway at my home where I have lived for 9 years." Harlow stared at him. The home security cameras captured what came next with perfect clarity. The audio was unmistakable. Harlow leaned forward, close enough that Elijah could feel the words on his face. "I don't care what you say you are. Around here, I give the orders." And in that moment, on his own property, in front of his own home, a 21-year federal officer with more service than every agent on that driveway combined was told that none of it mattered. Harlow moved without warning. His left hand shot forward, locked around Elijah's right wrist, and twisted it hard behind his back. The motion was fast, violent, and entirely unnecessary against a man who had not moved, had not raised his voice, had not done a single thing that any reasonable officer could interpret as resistance. Elijah's shoulder torqued under the pressure. He did not swing. He did not pull away. His voice stayed controlled even as pain flared through his arm. "You are assaulting a federal officer." Pettis was already moving. He grabbed Elijah's left arm from the other side and wrenched it back. Together, the 2 agents drove Elijah forward and slammed him face down onto the hood of his own SUV. The impact was hard enough to dent the metal. Elijah's forehead struck the edge of the roof rack with a sound that carried across the quiet street, sharp and unmistakable. A gash opened above his left eye. Blood ran immediately, streaking down the side of his face and onto the polished surface of the vehicle he had washed the day before in his own driveway on a Sunday afternoon while his sons played basketball 10 feet away. Harlow cuffed him. The metal bit into Elijah's wrists. He did not struggle. He lay still on the hood of his truck, bleeding, breathing through his nose, staring at the blurred reflection of tactical vests and drawn weapons in the paint. Behind them, one of the younger agents opened the rear door of the SUV and pulled out Elijah's duty bag. He unzipped it. Inside was a U.S. Marshal service badge in a leather case, a federal credential with Elijah's photograph and full title, a service-issued firearm in a locked holster, a courthouse access card with his name, rank, and agency printed across the front. The agent held up the badge and froze. He looked at Harlow. Harlow glanced at it. His eyes lingered for half a second. Then he looked away. He did not remove the cuffs. He did not call for a medic. He did not apologize. He said 2 words. "We'll sort it out." And Elijah Drummond, a 21-year deputy U.S. Marshal with 2 Department of Justice commendations, remained face down on the hood of his own vehicle, bleeding from his own forehead, cuffed with his own hands behind his back, in his own driveway. The sound carried. The slam of a body against metal, the shouting, the sharp commands echoing off the quiet homes of Birchwood Lane at an hour when most families were still finishing breakfast. Franklin Gaines heard it first. He was 68 years old, a retired Marine colonel who had served 30 years, including 2 combat deployments, and he lived directly across the street from the Drummonds. He had known Elijah for 9 years. They shared beers on the 4th of July. Their sons had played on the same football team. Gaines stepped onto his porch and saw Elijah, face down on the hood of his SUV, blood running from above his eye, wrists cuffed behind his back, surrounded by 6 agents in tactical vests. His reaction was immediate. "That man is a United States Marshal. What the hell are you doing?" Harlow turned toward him. "Sir, go back inside. This doesn't concern you." Gaines didn't move. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and began recording. "It concerns me when federal agents assault my neighbor in his own driveway." 2 houses down, Susan Pratt, 55, a registered nurse, stepped outside in a bathrobe. She saw the blood on Elijah's face before she saw anything else. "That man is injured. He needs medical attention. Let me help him." "Stay back, ma'am," Pettis called out. "This is an active operation." From an upstairs window on the other side of the street, a retired schoolteacher named Helen Corley began recording silently on her tablet, capturing the full width of the driveway from an elevated angle that showed every agent, every vehicle, and every second of what was happening to a man she had watched coach neighborhood children for nearly a decade. Then the front door opened. Corinne Drummond stood in the doorway. She saw the tactical vehicles. She saw the agents. She saw her husband bleeding and cuffed on the hood of his own truck. The scream that came from her was not theatrical. It was the sound of a woman watching the one thing she feared most happen in real time. Behind her, Isaiah appeared. He was 11 years old, still in pajamas, and when he saw his father on the ground with blood on his face, he began to cry. Nolan, 14, stepped past his mother. His face was tight, his eyes locked on the agents. He did not cry. He pulled out his phone and started recording. And on every camera, from every angle, the evidence continued to build. Harlow grabbed Elijah by the cuff chain and pulled him off the hood. Blood from the gash above his eye had reached his chin, dripping onto his polo collar in a pattern the cameras captured with devastating clarity. Harlow walked him to the rear of an ICE vehicle and pushed him inside. Elijah's head nearly struck the doorframe. Then Harlow turned to his team. Secure the scene. That meant one thing. Stop the recording. Pettis crossed the street toward Franklin Gaines, phone raised and steady on his porch. "Sir, stop filming or you'll be arrested for obstruction." Gaines didn't flinch. "You just assaulted a federal officer in his own driveway." "I'm not going anywhere." Another agent approached Susan Pratt, who held up her nursing ID. "That man is bleeding from a head wound. I'm a medical professional. Let me assess him. She was told to leave. She didn't. From her upstairs window, Helen Corley kept recording in silence, her tablet propped against the glass at an angle none of the agents had noticed. Inside the vehicle, Elijah sat upright, blood still running down the left side of his face, and spoke with the calm certainty of a man who understood federal law better than anyone on that driveway. You need to contact the United States Marshal Service immediately. You have made a serious error, and it is getting worse by the minute. The agent nearest the door shifted his weight but said nothing. Outside, Harlow leaned toward Pettis, his back to the nearest camera, but not far enough to escape the audio. He probably bought that badge online. The microphone captured every syllable, every ounce of contempt. And inside the house, behind a door that had just closed, Corinne Drummond was already reaching for her phone. Corinne's hands were shaking, but her voice was not. She dialed the U.S. Marshal Service District Office from memory. A number saved under a name Elijah had told her to use if anything ever went wrong. She had never called it before. She identified herself, gave Elijah's badge number, his rank, his assignment, and described what was happening. My husband is in handcuffs in the back of an ICE vehicle. He's bleeding from his head. They slammed him onto his own truck. There is no warrant. Our children are watching. 45 seconds later, Chief Deputy U.S. Marshal Raymond Booker was on the line. He was 56, a 28-year veteran who had little patience for incompetence and none for abuse. He listened for 60 seconds and said 5 words: "Do not hang up." Within 4 minutes, Booker had ICE's Regional Field Office Director on the phone. "You have one of my deputies in cuffs in his own driveway. He is bleeding. There is no warrant. Fix this in 5 minutes or I'm calling the Inspector General, the DOJ Civil Rights Division, and every federal authority with jurisdiction." 3 minutes later, Harlow's phone rang. He listened. The color left his face. He walked to the vehicle, opened the door, and removed the cuffs without a word. No apology, no explanation. Elijah stepped out, wiped blood from his eye, and looked at Harlow for a long moment. Then he turned, walked across his own driveway, up his own steps, and to his wife, standing on the porch, with one arm around each of their sons. The door closed. On Birchwood Lane, 6 ICE agents stood in a driveway that was not theirs, next to a vehicle they had dented, surrounded by witnesses they had tried to silence, holding the wreckage of careers that were already over. They just didn't know it yet. The machinery of federal accountability moved fast when one of its own was on the ground bleeding. Within 3 hours of the incident, the U.S. Marshal Service had formally requested every piece of evidence connected to the operation on Birchwood Lane. All body camera footage from every agent present, all operational planning documents, all communication logs. The source of the tip that brought 6 agents to a deputy marshal's driveway, and the warrant, which did not exist, because there was no warrant. There had never been one. Elijah's home security system delivered what the federal request could not yet provide: 4 cameras, 4 angles, high-definition video with continuous audio covering the full duration of the encounter, from the moment the first ICE vehicle turned onto the street to the moment Harlow removed the cuffs. Franklin Gaines submitted his phone recording and a written statement. Susan Pratt did the same. Helen Corley provided her tablet footage from the upstairs window, an elevated angle that captured the full driveway and every agent's position throughout. Corinne Drummond gave a statement that included what no camera could fully convey: her 11-year-old son crying in his pajamas, her 14-year-old recording his father's blood on a phone screen. The Marshal Service referred the matter simultaneously to the DHS Office of Inspector General and the DOJ Civil Rights Division. Separately, Elijah's commanding officer made a second referral to the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. The language was precise and devastating. Federal agents may have filed false operational documents, assaulted a sworn federal officer, attempted to suppress witness recordings, and conducted a warrantless seizure in direct violation of the Fourth Amendment. By nightfall, 3 federal agencies were investigating 6 ICE agents, and the evidence was already overwhelming. Federal investigators started with the tip. The call that Harlow had used to justify rolling 6 agents and 4 tactical vehicles onto a residential street at 6 a.m. was a vague, anonymous report about a suspicious foreign male at 4412 Maple Court. The description referenced a male in his late 20s, approximately 5'7", with a heavy accent. Elijah Drummond was 43, stood 6'2", was born in Richmond, Virginia, and had lived at 4638 Birchwood Lane for 9 years. Not the same street, not the same block, not even close. Investigators pulled Harlow's operational file for the morning. There was no proper plan, no supervisory authorization, no pre-operation briefing documented, no database check on the target address, no coordination with any other agency. Harlow had taken an unverified, anonymous call, skipped every required step, and launched a tactical operation against a home he had never confirmed was connected to anything. When investigators widened the scope, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Over the previous 3 years, Harlow had conducted 16 operations based on similarly unverified tips. Every single one targeted a home in a predominantly minority neighborhood. 11 resulted in unlawful detentions of individuals who had no connection to any immigration violation. 0 produced an actual arrest. Not one. Pettis had been present for 9 of those 16 operations. In every case, he filed supplemental reports that supported Harlow's version of events, using language so similar across reports that investigators flagged it as coordinated. The picture was no longer a single bad morning. It was a system. A pattern of warrantless, racially targeted operations run by an agent who had never been checked, backed by a subordinate who had never said no, and ignored by supervisors who had never looked closely enough to see what was right in front of them. The DHS Inspector General's preliminary report landed like a detonation. It described Harlow's unit as operating with reckless disregard for constitutional protections and a documented pattern of racially selective enforcement. The language was not cautious. It was not hedged. It was the kind of finding that ended not just careers, but entire command structures. The DOJ Civil Rights Division opened a formal investigation under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law. The FBI's Public Corruption Unit added a parallel track focused on falsification of federal documents, citing the operational reports Harlow and Pettis had filed across 16 operations that bore no resemblance to what actually occurred. ICE headquarters in Washington received a classified briefing. The room included senior officials, agency attorneys, and a liaison from the Department of Homeland Security's Office of General Counsel. A senior official looked at the still frame from Elijah's home security camera, a deputy U.S. Marshal face down on his own vehicle, bleeding, cuffed, his children visible in the doorway behind him, and said what everyone already knew. He put hands on a deputy U.S. Marshal, in his driveway, in front of his children, with cameras rolling. This is not survivable. Harlow and Pettis were placed on immediate unpaid suspension. Their credentials, firearms, and badges were confiscated the same afternoon. The 4 remaining agents from the unit were placed on administrative leave pending individual review. None were permitted contact with Harlow or Pettis. None were permitted access to agency systems. The federal government was no longer reviewing what happened on Birchwood Lane. It was dismantling the unit that caused it. Elijah required 6 stitches above his left eye. The gash from the roof rack left a scar that would fade, but never fully disappear. His right wrist was sprained from the cuffing, swollen enough that he wore a brace for 2 weeks. But the physical injuries were the smallest part of what Harlow's team left behind. Isaiah was 11. He stopped going outside in the mornings. He asked to be driven to school instead of walking to the bus stop, something he had done independently since 3rd grade. He told his school counselor that he was afraid men with guns would come to the house again. He began waking at night, standing at his bedroom window, watching the street. Nolan was 14. He did not cry after that morning. He oscillated between a quiet, simmering rage and long stretches of silence that worried his parents more than any outburst could have. He had watched the video he recorded of his own father being slammed onto a truck and bleeding on camera. He watched it more than once before Corinne found out and asked him to stop. He became withdrawn. His grades dropped. He quit responding to texts from teammates. Corinne took a week off from her school, then another. She sat with her sons, drove them to counseling, held the household together while managing a fury she kept hidden from the boys, but could not keep from her voice when she spoke to attorneys. Elijah went back to work after 10 days, but every morning he paused at the front door before stepping outside. A man who had spent 2 decades breaching doors to arrest the most dangerous fugitives in the country now hesitated before walking into his own driveway. One night, after the boys were asleep, he sat beside Corinne on the couch and said quietly, "I've been in rooms with killers who showed me more respect than those agents did." The federal grand jury returned indictments against both men within 2 months. Vincent Harlow and Dwayne Pettis were charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, conspiracy, assault on a federal officer, and falsification of federal records. Harlow was offered a plea deal that would have reduced his sentence significantly. He rejected it. He told his attorney he was doing his job and that no jury would convict a federal agent for following a tip. He was wrong. At trial, the prosecution played Elijah's home security footage in its entirety. 4 angles, uninterrupted audio. The jury watched a calm, identified, compliant federal officer slammed face first onto his own vehicle. They watched blood run down his face. They watched his children appear in the doorway. They heard Harlow say, "I don't care what you say you are." They heard him tell Pettis he probably bought that badge online. Harlow's attorney argued good faith reliance on an anonymous tip. The prosecution dismantled it in minutes. The tip described a man in his late 20s at an address 2 blocks away. Elijah was 43, lived on a different street, and had been a federal officer for over 2 decades. There was no operational plan, no warrant, no database check, no supervisory approval. Franklin Gaines testified. Susan Pratt testified. Corinne testified about what her son saw that morning. Then Elijah took the stand and recounted every moment with the same calm precision that had made him one of the most effective deputies in his district. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. Guilty on all counts. Harlow was sentenced to 4 years and 3 months in federal prison. Pettis, who had cooperated partially during the investigation, pleaded guilty to reduced charges and received 22 months. Elijah filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against Harlow, Pettis, and the Department of Homeland Security. The complaint cited assault on a federal officer, warrantless seizure in violation of the Fourth Amendment, racial profiling, excessive force, and intentional infliction of emotional distress on his wife and children. DHS attorneys reviewed the home security footage, the witness recordings, the investigative findings, and the criminal convictions. They settled before trial. The amount was $3.4 million, among the largest individual payouts in an ICE misconduct case. But the money was not the point. As part of the settlement, ICE agreed to a series of mandatory reforms within the regional field office. Warrant verification required before any enforcement operation. Independent review of all tips before tactical deployment. Mandatory cross-referencing of target addresses with federal law enforcement databases. Enhanced body camera compliance with automatic penalties for non-activation. An independent civilian oversight panel for community operations, with authority to review complaints and recommend disciplinary action. 3 supervisors above Harlow who had ignored or buried prior complaints were formally disciplined. 1 was forced into early retirement. 1 was demoted 2 grades and reassigned. A 3rd was transferred out of the region and permanently stripped of supervisory authority. Harlow's federal law enforcement certification was revoked permanently. He would never carry a badge again in any capacity. Pettis was barred from federal employment for life. His name was entered into a national database flagging former officers terminated for misconduct. The system that had protected both men for years did not protect them when the evidence was undeniable. The victim was a fellow federal officer, and every second of the abuse had been captured on camera from 4 angles with audio that left nothing to interpretation. Months later, Elijah Drummond walked out of his front door at 6:10 a.m. with his duty bag over his shoulder. He paused on the porch for a moment, the way he still did every morning, then stepped down and crossed the driveway to his SUV. The dent in the hood had been repaired. The scar above his left eye had faded to a thin line, but was still visible in certain light. He set his bag in the back seat, started the engine, and drove to the federal courthouse the same way he had driven it 1,000 times before. He walked through security, nodded to the deputies at the entrance, and sat down at his desk in the Fugitive Task Force office. His badge was clipped to his belt. His credentials were in his pocket. He did the job he had done for 21 years. At home, the security camera still ran. 4 angles, audio-enabled, recording every car that turned onto Birchwood Lane, every footstep on the driveway, every moment of every day. Isaiah had started going outside again. He walked to the bus stop most mornings now, though he still looked over his shoulder more than an 11-year-old should. Nolan had returned to football. He was quieter than before, but he was there, and his coaches said he played harder than anyone on the field. Corinne still watched from the window every morning until Elijah's SUV pulled out of the driveway and disappeared around the corner. She never told him. He never asked. Across town, Vincent Harlow sat in a federal detention facility. His badge was gone. His pension was gone. His name now appeared in federal law enforcement training materials under the heading Case Study, Unlawful Warrantless Seizure and Assault on a Fellow Federal Officer. He was used as an example of everything an agent should never become. Back on Birchwood Lane, Franklin Gaines still sat on his porch most mornings with a cup of coffee and a clear view of the street. He waved when Elijah left for work. Elijah waved back. The street was quiet again. But the cameras were always on. Now, watching footage like this, it can really stick with you, right? Some of these clips stay in your head, especially late at night when you're trying to fall asleep. And speaking of sleep, a lot of you have told me you're waking up at 2 or 3 a.m. and just lying there. Can't shut your mind off. And the next day you're dragging through everything. I came across a simple 21-day sleep guide that's helped thousands of people fix exactly that. No pills, no apps, no gadgets, just a step-by-step plan that actually works. It's only $15. I put the link in the description if you want to check it out. All right, I'll catch you in the next one.
Don't play games with me. You think I don't know what this is?
Sir, it's my vehicle. The registration is inside.
Yeah, I've heard that one before. Nice car, clean story. Guys like you don't just roll through here in something like this.
I'm active duty Navy. I can show you my ID.
At 7:14 a.m. at a rural gas station off Highway 9 in Coulter County, Georgia, a black man in civilian clothes stood at pump number 3, filling a black Chevy Tahoe. He wore a plain gray t-shirt, jeans, and running shoes. Nothing about him drew attention. He wasn't on the phone. He wasn't looking around. He was just pumping gas on a quiet Tuesday morning, the same way millions of Americans do every single day. The man was Senior Chief Darnell Sutton, 38 years old, an active-duty Navy SEAL with 16 years in special operations. He had spent the last 2 weeks on leave visiting his mother in Albany, and now he was driving back to Naval Station Norfolk for a scheduled debrief. His military ID was in his wallet. His registration and insurance were in the glove box. His leave papers were folded inside a manila envelope on the passenger seat. Everything was in order. None of it would matter for the next 40 minutes. A Coulter County Sheriff's cruiser pulled into the station lot and parked diagonally behind the Tahoe, blocking it in. The driver's side door opened slowly. Sheriff Dwight Hargrove stepped out. He was 52 years old, 26 years in the department, elected 3 times by a county that was 68% white and had never once questioned how he ran things. He was tall, broad, and unhurried. His hand rested on his duty belt as he walked toward the pump. His eyes were already locked on Sutton. Not on the vehicle, not on the plates, on the man. Hargrove stopped 6 feet away, feet planted wide, chin tilted up. "That your vehicle?" Sutton turned, nozzle still in hand. "Yes, sir." Hargrove didn't acknowledge the answer. He stepped past Sutton and circled the Tahoe slowly, peering through the tinted windows, running his hand along the rear door frame as if checking for something. He paused at the back, looked at the plates, then looked at Sutton again. "This vehicle matches a stolen report out of Valdosta. Black Tahoe, recent model." Sutton's expression didn't change. His voice stayed even. "I have the registration right in the glove box. I can show you." Hargrove ignored the offer entirely. He didn't ask for the registration, didn't ask for a license, didn't run the plates. Instead, he pointed at the hood. "Step away from the vehicle. Hands on the hood. Now." Sutton set the nozzle back in the pump, stepped forward, and placed both palms flat on the hood of his own car. He didn't argue. He didn't hesitate. 16 years of training had taught him to assess a situation before reacting, and right now, every instinct told him this man had already made up his mind. What Sutton didn't know yet was that 2 cameras were already recording. The gas station's exterior security system captured the lot from 2 angles in continuous, high-definition footage. And 30 feet away, parked near the air pump, a long-haul truck sat idling with a dash cam mounted on the windshield, capturing a wide-angle view of everything unfolding at pump number 3. The driver, a man named Earl Jessup, was inside the station eating a biscuit sandwich. He wouldn't learn what his camera had recorded until hours later, but when he did, that footage would change everything. Hargrove keyed his radio and called for backup. Deputy Ronnie Skaggs, 29 years old, 3 years on the job, Hargrove's hand-picked protege. Skaggs had been hired straight out of the sheriff's personal recommendation. No prior law enforcement experience, no academy honors, just a last name Hargrove knew from church, and a willingness to follow orders without asking questions. He arrived in under 4 minutes, cruiser pulling in fast, gravel popping under the tires. He stepped out and walked straight to Hargrove's side without once looking at Sutton, like a person. Together they ran the plates. The results came back clean. The Tahoe was registered to Darnell Sutton at an address in Virginia Beach, Virginia. The VIN matched. There was no stolen vehicle flag, no warrants, no alerts of any kind. The system had given them every reason to let him go. Hargrove didn't let him go. He looked at the screen on Skaggs's cruiser laptop and shook his head. Registration could be forged. These guys are sophisticated now. Clone a VIN, swap plates, drive it right across state lines. Sutton stood with his palms still flat on the hood of his own vehicle, the morning heat already warming the metal beneath his hands. He spoke without turning around. "I have my military ID and leave orders in the vehicle. I'm active duty Navy. I can show you everything right now." Hargrove stepped closer. "I don't care about military papers. You can buy a uniform at any surplus store. Doesn't mean you earned it." Skaggs laughed, a short, ugly sound that carried across the lot. Sutton said nothing. His fingers pressed harder into the hood, but he didn't move. Hargrove walked to the passenger side of the Tahoe and tried the handle. It was locked. He turned to Sutton. "Open it." Sutton kept his voice level. "I do not consent to a search. There's no probable cause." Hargrove didn't pause. He turned to Skaggs. "Open it. We've got exigent circumstances." There were no exigent circumstances. No weapon in plain view, no odor of contraband, no indication of danger. Just a clean registration, a cooperating man, and 2 officers who had already decided what they wanted to find. Skaggs used a Slim Jim from his cruiser to pop the lock. They started with the back seat. A duffel bag, zipped open and dumped across the seat. Gym clothes, toiletries, a paperback novel. Then the garment bag. Skaggs unzipped it and pulled out a set of navy dress blues, pressed and squared away, ribbons pinned in perfect order. Hargrove took the uniform from Skaggs and held it up by the hanger, turning it in the light like a prop. He looked at Skaggs with a half grin. "You ever seen a real Navy SEAL?" Skaggs glanced at Sutton, then back at the uniform. "Not one that looks like him." They both laughed. Sutton heard every word. His jaw tightened. His breathing stayed controlled. Behind the gas station counter, a young white woman named Colleen Fitch stood motionless, her phone raised to the window, recording. She had started filming the moment the second cruiser pulled in. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The camera was catching everything, the laughter, the uniform held up like a joke, and the man at the hood who had earned every ribbon on it, standing in silence while two men who hadn't mocked him for it. Hargrove pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt and grabbed Sutton's left wrist without warning. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Sutton turned slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. "What am I being charged with?" "Suspicion of grand theft auto and possession of stolen property." Hargrove snapped the first cuff tight. "The plates came back clean," Sutton said. "The VIN matches my registration. You know this vehicle isn't stolen." Hargrove yanked the second wrist back and locked the cuff. "We'll sort that out at the station." Out on Highway 9, cars had begun to slow. A white minivan with a family inside drifted past at half speed, the mother in the passenger seat staring through the window, one hand over her mouth. A pickup truck pulled onto the shoulder briefly, then moved on. A man on a motorcycle slowed, looked, and kept riding. They all saw the same thing. A black man in handcuffs standing beside his own vehicle while two officers treated him like he'd committed the crime of the century. Hargrove gripped Sutton by the back of the neck and steered him toward the cruiser. When they reached the rear door, Hargrove pushed Sutton's head down hard, far harder than necessary. Sutton's shoulder caught the edge of the doorframe. The impact twisted his upper body sideways, and his forehead struck the plexiglass partition inside the cruiser. A small cut opened just above his left eyebrow. A thin line of blood ran down toward his eyelid. Sutton didn't cry out, didn't flinch, didn't say a word. He sat back against the seat, hands cuffed behind him, blood slowly tracking down the side of his face, and he breathed. Slow and measured. The way he'd been trained to breathe when everything around him was falling apart. The way he breathed in rooms most people would never know existed. He waited. At the Coulter County Sheriff's Office, Sutton was processed like a man who had committed a violent felony. They took his mugshot under fluorescent lights, the cut above his eyebrow still fresh, blood dried in a thin line down his temple. They rolled his fingerprints. They confiscated his wallet, his phone, his watch, his military ID, and the manila envelope containing his leave orders. Every item was bagged, tagged, and placed in a locker behind the intake desk, as if it were evidence in a murder case. He was walked down a narrow hallway and placed in a holding cell with a concrete bench and a steel toilet. The door locked behind him with a sound that echoed off every wall. Sutton sat on the bench. "I'd like to make a phone call." Hargrove stood on the other side of the bars, arms crossed. "You'll get one when we're done processing." Then he walked away. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 3. No phone call, no water, no update, no explanation. The processing had taken less than 15 minutes. The rest was silence and concrete. Down the hall in Hargrove's office, the sheriff and his deputies sat across from each other writing their arrest report. The document they produced bore almost no resemblance to what had happened at that gas station. It stated that the subject was evasive and uncooperative during questioning. It stated that the subject made furtive movements toward the vehicle, consistent with an attempt to flee. It stated that the subject refused to provide identification and became verbally combative when asked to comply with lawful orders. Every line was a lie. Every sentence was designed to justify what the cameras had already proven was unjustifiable. And while Hargrove signed his name at the bottom of that report, the black Chevy Tahoe sat in the station's impound lot, already confirmed clean through 3 separate database checks. No stolen flag, no VIN discrepancy, no alert of any kind. Hargrove had seen the results. He had buried them. Because admitting the vehicle was clean meant admitting the arrest was wrong. And Dwight Hargrove had not admitted he was wrong in 26 years. He wasn't going to start now. After 3 hours and 47 minutes, Hargrove appeared at the holding cell door. "You get 1 call." Sutton stood, walked to the desk phone at the end of the hallway, and dialed a number from memory. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't call his mother. He called his commanding officer at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California. The call lasted less than 3 minutes. Sutton spoke in short, precise sentences. He gave his name, rank, and service number. He stated his location. He described the stop, the search, the cuffs, the cut on his forehead, the fabricated charge, and the 4 hours without a phone call or water. He said, "I'm being held at the Coulter County Sheriff's Office in Georgia. The vehicle is mine. The plates are clean. They know it's clean." His commanding officer, Captain Leon Briggs, asked one question. "Are you injured?" "Small cut above my eyebrow. I'm fine." Briggs said, "Sit tight. We're making calls." The line went dead. Within 20 minutes, Captain Briggs had contacted NCIS, the Navy JAG Corps, and the Department of Defense Liaison for Law Enforcement Affairs. Within 40 minutes, phones were ringing at the Coulter County Sheriff's Office from numbers with Washington, D.C. area codes. The desk sergeant, a woman named Pam Gunther, who had worked the front desk for 9 years, answered the first call with the same flat tone she used for noise complaints and parking disputes. She didn't understand what was happening. The voice on the line asked to speak with the officer in charge of the detention of Senior Chief Darnell Sutton. She transferred the call to Hargrove. He picked up the receiver in his office, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Sheriff Hargrove?" What he heard next straightened his spine. The voice on the other end identified themselves as a representative from the Pentagon's Office of General Counsel. The tone was not a request. It was a notification. And for the first time that morning, the confidence in Dwight Hargrove's face cracked. While Sutton sat in a holding cell staring at a concrete wall, 2 things happened simultaneously that he knew nothing about. The first began behind the counter of the gas station off Highway 9. Colleen Fitch, the 23-year-old attendant who had watched the entire encounter through the store window, sat in the back office during her break and opened her phone. She had recorded 4 minutes and 11 seconds of footage, starting from the moment Skaggs pulled the dress blues out of the garment bag. The video showed the uniform held up like a costume. It showed 2 officers laughing. It showed a man in handcuffs being shoved headfirst into a cruiser. She uploaded it to 3 platforms with a single caption. "Sheriff just arrested a black man for driving his own car. He's military." Within the first hour, the video had 12,000 views. By the second hour, it had crossed 40,000. Comments flooded in. Shares multiplied, local activist pages picked it up. A civil rights attorney in Atlanta reposted it with the words, "This is Coulter County. This is what they do." The second thing happened 30 miles north at a truck stop off Interstate 16. Earl Jessup, the long-haul driver who had been parked at the gas station that morning eating a biscuit sandwich, saw the video on his phone while scrolling during a fuel stop. He recognized the gas station immediately. Then he recognized the Tahoe. Then he remembered his dash cam. He pulled the footage from the device and watched it. His camera had captured the entire encounter from a wider angle, the cruiser blocking the Tahoe in, the circling, the pat-down, the search, the cuffs, the shove, all of it from a clean, unobstructed vantage point. Jessup called the local news station in Savannah. He told them what he had. They told him not to delete anything and sent a crew to meet him within the hour. By early afternoon, the Coulter County Sheriff's Office was receiving media inquiries from outlets it had never heard of, asking questions it had no answers for. And Dwight Hargrove, sitting behind his desk with a phone that wouldn't stop ringing, was beginning to realize that the quiet arrest he had made at pump number 3 was no longer quiet. Hargrove closed his office door and told Skaggs to sit down. "The video is online," he said. Skaggs had already seen it. His face was pale. Hargrove pulled up the arrest report on his computer and stared at it. The line about Sutton attempting to flee stood out now like a lit fuse. "We need to clean this up," Hargrove said. He began editing the document, softening the language, removing the claim about furtive movements, replacing verbally combative with initially uncooperative. Skaggs watched but said nothing. He didn't object. He didn't question it. He sat in the same silence he had maintained at the gas station and let Hargrove rewrite the record. When the revised version was saved, Hargrove picked up the phone and called the county attorney, Vernon Poole. He explained the situation in broad terms, downplaying the force, omitting the cut on Sutton's forehead, framing the video as misleading and out of context. Poole listened, then asked one question. "Is the vehicle stolen?" Hargrove paused. "No." "Release him," Poole said. "Right now. No further statements, no press comments, nothing. Just let him go." Hargrove pushed back. "If we release him now, it looks like we were wrong. If you hold him any longer," Poole said, his voice flat, "this becomes federal. It may already be." Hargrove hung up. He sat for a long moment, jaw working, fingers drumming the desk. Then he made one more call. He ordered the Tahoe towed from the station impound lot to a secondary facility 30 miles south in Jessup. When Sutton was finally brought out of the holding cell, Hargrove handed him a clear plastic bag containing his wallet, phone, and watch. His military ID and leave papers were inside a separate envelope. No apology, no explanation. Hargrove told him the charges were being reviewed and that his vehicle would be available for retrieval once the investigation concluded. Sutton asked where the vehicle was. Hargrove said, "Jessup, 30 miles south. You can pick it up when we're done." Sutton stood on the front steps of the Coulter County Sheriff's Office at 4:17 in the afternoon. No vehicle, no ride. A cut above his eyebrow held together by dried blood. A town he'd never been to, and no reason to trust a single person in it. He put his hands in his pockets and started walking. The next morning, 3 black SUVs pulled into the parking lot of the Coulter County Sheriff's Office. The men and women who stepped out wore no uniforms, but their credentials spoke louder than any badge in the building. 2 NCIS special agents, a Department of Defense civil rights investigator, a representative from the FBI's Civil Rights Division. They walked through the front door at 8:06 a.m. and asked to speak with Sheriff Dwight Hargrove. Pam Gunther, the desk sergeant, stared at the federal IDs laid across her counter and picked up the phone without a word. Within the first hour, the investigators had secured the gas station's exterior security footage, both angles, full resolution, time-stamped. They had Earl Jessup's dashcam footage, already preserved by the Savannah news station that had copied it the day before. They had Colleen Fitch's phone video, downloaded directly from her device with her full cooperation. And then they found what Hargrove had hoped no one would look for: 2 versions of the arrest report. The original, filed at 1:42 p.m. the previous day, claiming Sutton was evasive, uncooperative, and attempted to flee, and the amended version, saved at 3:58 p.m. just hours later, with the language softened and the fleeing claim removed. The metadata was intact. The timestamps were undeniable. An NCIS agent placed both versions side by side on Hargrove's own desk and said, "You want to explain why there are 2 of these?" Hargrove called for his attorney. The interviews that followed took the rest of the day. Colleen Fitch described what she saw from behind the counter: the stop, the search, the laughter, the uniform held up like a prop. Earl Jessup described the cruiser pulling in at an angle, blocking the Tahoe before a single word had been spoken. 2 motorists who had slowed on Highway 9 gave statements describing Sutton in cuffs, compliant and still, while Hargrove shoved him into the cruiser. 3 customers inside the gas station described hearing the exchange through the open door. Every account matched. Sutton was calm. Sutton was cooperative. Sutton never raised his voice, never resisted, never moved without being told to. The sheriff was aggressive. The sheriff was mocking. The deputy followed without question, and the 2 reports sitting on the desk confirmed what the footage already proved: that Hargrove hadn't just arrested an innocent man, he had tried to bury it afterward. The federal investigation did not stop at the gas station. It went deeper. Investigators subpoenaed 5 years of arrest records from the Coulter County Sheriff's Office. Every traffic stop, every detention, every use of force report filed under Hargrove's authority. The data analysts who reviewed the numbers didn't need long to see the pattern. It was staggering. 74% of all traffic stops personally initiated by Hargrove involved Black or Latino drivers. In a county that was 68% white. The numbers alone would have been damning, but the paper trail made it worse. Investigators pulled complaint files from storage rooms and filing cabinets in the basement of the sheriff's office. Some were in folders so old the edges had yellowed. 8 prior allegations of excessive force. 11 formal complaints of racial profiling. Every single one had been reviewed and dismissed internally, and every single one had been dismissed by Hargrove himself. As elected sheriff, he oversaw his own disciplinary process. He was the complaint department. He was the review board. He was the final word. And his final word, in every case, was that nothing had happened. Then the witnesses came forward. 3 former deputies, all of whom had left the department within the past 4 years, contacted federal investigators through an anonymous tip line. Their accounts painted a picture of a department rotting from the top. Racial slurs were common in the break room and on ride-alongs. Hargrove referred to certain neighborhoods in the county using terms no official should ever speak aloud. Deputies who pushed back or refused to participate in targeted stops were quietly reassigned to overnight shifts, denied promotions, or pressured until they resigned. One of the 3 former deputies provided something the investigators hadn't expected: a recording. It was audio from a department barbecue 2 summers earlier, captured on a phone that had been left recording on a picnic table. In the recording, Hargrove could be heard telling a joke to a circle of deputies. The joke was about a black man driving a nice car and getting pulled over for stealing it. The punchline got laughs. It was the exact scenario he had manufactured against Darnell Sutton at pump number 3. When federal investigators played that recording in a closed briefing room, no one in the room said a word. They didn't need to. The pattern wasn't just visible. It was documented, repeated, and systemic. And it had been protected for over a decade by the one man who was supposed to prevent it. A federal grand jury convened in the Southern District of Georgia. The proceedings lasted 2 days. The evidence was presented methodically. The gas station footage, the dash cam footage, Colleen Fitch's phone video, the original arrest report and the amended version with its damning metadata, the 5 years of stop data, the buried complaints, the former deputy's testimony, the barbecue recording. On the second day, the grand jury returned indictments. Sheriff Dwight Hargrove was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, conspiracy to obstruct justice for the falsified and amended arrest reports, and filing false statements in connection with a federal investigation. Deputy Ronnie Skaggs was indicted as a co-conspirator and charged with accessory to civil rights violations. He had followed every order. He had laughed at every joke. He had stood by while an innocent man was searched, cuffed, cut, and caged. The law had a name for that kind of silence. County Attorney Vernon Poole was investigated for his role in advising Hargrove during the hours between the arrest and the release. Prosecutors examined whether his instruction to release Sutton was damage control or genuine legal counsel. Poole cooperated fully, turned over phone records and emails, and provided a detailed timeline of his communications with Hargrove that afternoon. He avoided indictment, but his reputation in Coulter County would never fully recover. Hargrove posted bail and was suspended from duty pending trial. The governor's office issued a statement confirming that an interim sheriff would be appointed. 2 days later, Hargrove stood behind a podium outside the county courthouse and gave a press conference. His voice was steady, but his eyes were hard. He called the indictment a federal witch hunt, driven by media pressure and political agendas. He said he had served Coulter County faithfully for 26 years and that he would be vindicated. The clip was picked up by national outlets within the hour. It went viral, but not in his favor. The comment sections filled with links to the gas station footage, screenshots of the arrest data, and quotes from the barbecue recording. Hargrove had spent 26 years controlling the narrative in Coulter County. He could not control this one. The federal trial began on a Monday morning in the Southern District of Georgia. It lasted 2.5 weeks. On the first day, prosecutors played all 3 video sources synchronized on split screens: gas station security, Earl Jessup's dashcam, Colleen Fitch's phone footage. The jury watched from 3 angles as Sutton complied with every command, while Hargrove circled, mocked, searched, and fabricated. They heard the surplus store comment. They heard Skaggs laugh. They watched Hargrove shove Sutton's head into the doorframe and saw the cut open above his eyebrow. Sutton testified on the 4th day with the precision of someone trained to deliver after-action reports. Every word, every gesture, every minute on that concrete bench. When asked why he didn't resist, he paused. Because I know what happens to a black man who resists, even when he's right. Especially when he's right. 3 former deputies described a department culture built on slurs and selective enforcement. A statistical expert presented the arrest data. 74% of Hargrove stops targeted black or Latino drivers in a county that was 68% white. Hargrove's defense claimed he acted on a legitimate stolen vehicle report. Prosecutors proved no such report existed in any database. The jury deliberated 5 hours. Guilty on all counts. Hargrove received 6 years. Skaggs received 2. Neither man apologized. The civil lawsuit followed. Sutton filed against Coulter County, Hargrove, and Skaggs, citing unlawful detention, excessive force, racial profiling, fabrication of evidence, and deliberate indifference. Discovery unearthed internal emails between county officials calling Hargrove's behavior a known issue, but noting he delivers results and the voters like him. The county settled for $4.2 million and entered a federal consent decree mandating independent oversight, mandatory bias training, body cameras, a civilian review board, and demographic reporting on all stops and arrests. Hargrove's name was removed from the department's wall of honor. His portrait was taken down from the courthouse lobby. No ceremony, no announcement. Just an empty hook on the wall and a faint outline where the frame had been. This case was brutal, but the case on the right spirals completely out of control.
Don't move. Not one more step.
I'm standing still.
You expect me to believe this is your house? In this neighborhood? With these homes? You think I'm just going to nod and walk away?
I bought it. My name's on the
I've been patrolling this street for years. I know the families here. I know the cars. I know the...
At 2:47 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon in a quiet cul-de-sac in the Maplewood Estates subdivision, 2 police officers pinned a black man face down on his own front lawn. He was wearing gym shorts and a faded navy t-shirt. His wrists were cuffed behind his back, pressed into the grass hard enough to draw blood. His name was on the mailbox 10 feet away. His military ID was on the kitchen counter just inside the front door, and his 7-year-old daughter stood in that doorway, screaming for her father, while an officer blocked her path with an outstretched arm. The man on the ground was Senior Chief Darnell Carter, an active-duty Navy SEAL with 17 years of decorated Special Operations service. He had survived combat deployments most people would never read about. He had carried wounded teammates through enemy fire. He had earned commendations that filled an entire drawer in his home office. And now he was face down on the lawn he mowed every Sunday morning, bleeding from the wrists, while his daughter begged strangers to stop hurting him. The neighbor who made the call stood on her porch 15 yards away, arms crossed, lips pressed together in a thin, satisfied line. She watched the scene like someone watching a plan come together. She had no idea what she had just set in motion. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe because the next story is one you don't want to miss. Senior Chief Darnell Carter was 39 years old. He had spent more than half his life in uniform, 17 years in naval special warfare, rotating between combat deployments, advanced training cycles, and the rare stretches of quiet at home that never lasted long enough. He had been awarded the Bronze Star, 2 Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medals, and a Purple Heart he never talked about. His record was spotless. His reputation within his unit was simple. Darnell gets it done and keeps his people alive. 6 months earlier, he had purchased a 4-bedroom home in Maplewood Estates, a clean, tree-lined subdivision on the west side of the city. It was the kind of neighborhood with trimmed hedges, American flags on porches, and block parties in the summer. He had chosen it for one reason: his daughter, Zoe. She was 7, bright, fearless, and the only person in the world who could make him laugh until his chest hurt. Her mother, Darnell's wife, had passed from cancer 2 years prior. Since then, it had been just the two of them. Every morning followed the same rhythm. Darnell woke at 500, ran 3 miles through the neighborhood while the streets were still dark, then came home to make breakfast. Eggs, toast, fruit. Zoe always wanted pancakes. He gave in on Saturdays. By the time she was up, the kitchen smelled like syrup and coffee, and for a few hours, the world felt like something other than a mission. But the neighborhood had not welcomed them. Not openly. Not with slurs or signs. It was quieter than that. It was the way conversations stopped when he walked past. The way no one introduced themselves in the first month. The way HOA notices appeared on his door about the height of his grass 2 days after he moved in, while lawns on either side of him went untouched. And then there was the woman next door. Karen Whitfield was 58 years old and had lived on Maplewood Drive for 22 years. She was retired from an office management position at a local insurance firm and had appointed herself the unofficial coordinator of the Neighborhood Watch, a role no one had asked her to fill and no one had the energy to challenge. She knew every car that belonged on the street, every dog walker's schedule, every trash can that stayed out too long. She kept a spiral notebook on her kitchen counter where she logged anything she considered out of place. A van parked too long, an unfamiliar face on the sidewalk, a garage door left open past dark. Her husband Gerald, 61, was a quiet man who read the paper in his recliner and agreed with whatever Karen said, not because he believed it, but because disagreeing cost more energy than it was worth. He never questioned her calls, never asked her to stop. Never once walked across the yard to introduce himself to the new neighbor. Karen had opposed the sale of the house from the beginning. Before Darnell had even moved in, she had written 3 emails to the HOA board expressing concerns about maintaining neighborhood character and preserving community standards. She never used the word race. She didn't have to. In the 6 months since Darnell moved in, Karen had called the police 8 times in connection with his property. Once for a plumber's van she didn't recognize, once for a friend of Darnell's who sat in a parked car for 10 minutes waiting to be let in, once for an Amazon delivery driver who walked to the side gate. Every call was logged by dispatch. Every call resulted in no violation, no arrest, no crime. But Karen kept calling, and she kept writing in her notebook. Times he left, times he returned, how many lights were on at night, whether the garage was open or closed. She watched his house the way a person watches something they believe doesn't belong. That Saturday afternoon, Darnell was in his open garage assembling a basketball hoop he had ordered for Zoe's birthday. The box was spread across the driveway, parts and bolts laid out on a towel, instructions pinned under a wrench. He had a small speaker playing music on the workbench and a glass of water beside it. Zoe was inside watching cartoons, checking through the window every few minutes to see how the hoop was coming along. It was the kind of scene that played out in driveways across the country every weekend. A father building something for his kid. Nothing more. But from her kitchen window, Karen Whitfield saw something different. She saw a black man in her neighbor's garage with tools and open boxes. She watched for less than 2 minutes before picking up her phone and dialing 911. The call was recorded. Her voice was calm, steady, almost rehearsed. She told the dispatcher there was a suspicious black male who appeared to be breaking into a garage at the address. She paused, then added that he could be armed and that she believed there was a child inside the house who might be in danger. Every word was chosen. The mention of a weapon guaranteed an elevated response. The mention of a child in danger ensured officers would arrive fast and arrive aggressive. She never once mentioned the possibility that the man might live there. She never said he was her neighbor. She never described the basketball hoop parts spread across the driveway or the music playing from a small speaker. She described a threat. A black man, possibly armed, near a child. And then she hung up and walked to her porch to wait. Within 4 minutes, dispatch sent 2 patrol units to the address. The call was flagged as a priority, and 2 officers were already reaching for their car doors before Karen had even sat down in her porch chair. The call went out at 2:43 p.m. 2 patrol units were dispatched to Maplewood Drive on a priority response. The dispatcher's notes read, "Suspicious male, possibly armed, child possibly in danger." That language changed everything. It moved the call from a routine check to a high-alert approach. Officers were told to expect a threat before they had even turned onto the street. The lead responder was Officer Ryan Briggs, 36 years old, 10 years with the department. Briggs had built a reputation that depended on who you asked. His supervisors described him as assertive and decisive. Officers who had worked calls with him used different words: aggressive, reactive, heavy-handed. Black residents in the surrounding neighborhoods knew him by pattern, if not by name. He was the officer who always seemed to show up when the call involved someone who looked like them, and who always seemed to find a reason to escalate. 4 formal complaints of excessive force had been filed against Briggs over the past 6 years. 2 involved black men detained during routine stops. 1 involved a teenager handcuffed on a sidewalk for matching a vague description. All 4 had been reviewed internally. All 4 had been dismissed. Briggs had never faced suspension, retraining, or formal discipline of any kind. His partner that afternoon was Officer Dana Sutton, 28, 2 years on the job. She was quiet, competent on paper, and entirely deferential to Briggs. She had never once questioned a decision he made on a call. She followed where he led, did what he did, and wrote her reports to match his. A 3rd unit arrived separately. Corporal James Fenton, 44, was a veteran officer with 18 years of service and a clean record. He had no complaints on file and was known among peers as measured and thorough. He parked at the end of the cul-de-sac and stayed near his vehicle, observing. He did not rush in. That decision, and everything that followed it, would matter later. Briggs and Sutton came in fast. Both patrol cars turned onto Maplewood Drive with lights flashing and sirens cutting through the quiet of the street. Tires barked against the curb as Briggs stopped his cruiser at an angle across the bottom of Darnell's driveway. Sutton pulled in behind him and swung wide to the left. Darnell heard them before he saw them. He set the drill down on the driveway, stepped clear of the basketball hoop parts, and turned toward the street with both hands open and visible at his sides. His posture was straight. His expression was calm. 17 years of training told him exactly what to do and exactly what not to do. Briggs was out of his vehicle before the engine fully stopped. His service weapon was drawn, both hands on the grip, barrel leveled at Darnell's chest from 20 feet away. "Get on the ground now! Hands where I can see them!" Darnell's voice was steady. "I live here. This is my house. My daughter is inside." Briggs moved closer, weapon still raised. "I said get on the ground!" Sutton came around the far side of the cruiser, hand on her holster, cutting off any path toward the side yard. Darnell did not move suddenly. He did not raise his voice. He lowered himself slowly, narrating every motion the way he had been trained. "I'm getting down. I'm kneeling. My hands are open. I am not armed." His knees touched the driveway, then his palms, then the grass at the edge of the lawn. And as Briggs closed the distance with his weapon still drawn, the front door opened. Zoe stood in the doorway in a pink t-shirt and shorts, her eyes wide, her small body frozen for 1 second before the scream came. "Daddy!" Sutton turned and moved toward the door, arm extended. "Get back inside, now!" Zoe didn't move. She screamed again, louder, reaching for her father. Across the street, a man named Victor Langley stepped off his porch, phone already raised and recording. He didn't say a word. He just held the camera steady and let it capture what was happening on Darnell Carter's front lawn. Briggs closed the distance in 3 steps. He grabbed the back of Darnell's neck and drove him forward, forcing his face into the grass. Darnell didn't resist. His arms stayed wide, palms open, fingers spread. Briggs dropped his knee into the center of Darnell's back and pressed down with his full weight. The air left Darnell's lungs in a sharp exhale. "I am not resisting," Darnell said through clenched teeth. "I live here. Please check my ID." Briggs pulled Darnell's wrists together behind his back and snapped the cuffs on hard, metal biting into skin. He yanked them tight, one extra click past what was necessary. Then he leaned down, his mouth close to Darnell's ear. "Stop talking." At the front door, Sutton stood with one arm across the frame, blocking Zoe from stepping outside. The child was shaking, tears running down her face, her small hands gripping the door frame. "Daddy! Let go of my daddy!" Sutton didn't bend down, didn't soften her voice. "Get inside, now. Close the door." Zoe didn't close the door. She stood there screaming, 7 years old, watching her father pinned to the ground by a man with a badge and a knee on his spine. Karen Whitfield walked slowly to the edge of her yard. She stood just past her property line, arms folded, watching the scene with an expression that held no alarm and no concern. She said nothing. Briggs searched Darnell's pockets roughly. Gym shorts, no wallet, no weapon, no contraband, nothing. Darnell's voice stayed controlled. "My military ID is on the kitchen counter. My name is on the mailbox. You can check both right now." Briggs didn't look at the mailbox, didn't glance at the front door. He leaned back on his knee and said, "People like you always have a story." From across the street, an older black couple stepped onto their porch. James and Beverly Washington, both in their late 60s, longtime residents of the street. Mr. Washington called out, "That man lives there. He's our neighbor. You're making a mistake." Briggs pointed at him without turning his head. "Sir, step back inside or I will arrest you for obstruction." Mrs. Washington grabbed her husband's arm. Her eyes were wet. They stayed on the porch. They did not go inside. Corporal James Fenton had been standing near his cruiser at the end of the cul-de-sac for nearly 4 minutes. He had watched the approach, the drawn weapon, the takedown, the cuffs. He had heard Darnell identify himself twice. He had heard the child screaming from the doorway, and he had watched Briggs ignore every word the man on the ground said. Fenton walked forward now, past Sutton's cruiser, past the basketball hoop part still spread across the driveway. He stopped at the mailbox at the edge of Darnell's front yard and looked at it. The name was printed clearly on the side in white adhesive letters. Carter. He looked at the man in the grass, then back at the mailbox. Then he walked to the front door where Sutton still stood blocking the child. He didn't go inside. He didn't need to. Through the glass panel beside the door, he could see the hallway. Family photos lined the wall. A man in navy dress blues holding a small girl. The same man on the lawn. The same girl in the doorway. Fenton turned and walked back to Briggs. "Uncuff him." Briggs looked up. "What?" "His name is on the mailbox. His photos are on the wall. He lives here. Uncuff him." Briggs shook his head. "We need to clear the house first. Could be a domestic situation. Could be anything." Fenton's voice dropped. It was no longer a suggestion. "I'm a corporal. You're an officer. I'm telling you to take the cuffs off that man right now." Briggs stared at him for a long second, jaw clenched, then stood up and stepped back without reaching for the cuffs. Fenton knelt down beside Darnell. "I'm going to remove these. Stay still." He unlocked the left cuff first, then the right. The metal had cut into the skin on both wrists. Blood smeared across Darnell's palms as he brought his hands forward. The moment the cuffs came off, Zoe broke past Sutton and ran across the lawn. She hit her father's chest before he could even sit up fully, her arms locking around his neck, her face buried against him, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. Darnell held her with both hands and said nothing. He just held her. Fenton stood and spoke quietly. "I'm sorry, sir." Behind them, Briggs turned toward his cruiser. His voice was low, but not low enough. "This isn't over." Victor Langley's phone caught it from across the street, and the red light on Fenton's body camera had been blinking the entire time. Darnell sat on the front porch steps with Zoe in his lap. She had stopped screaming, but hadn't stopped shaking. Her fingers gripped his t-shirt so tight her knuckles were pale. He rested one hand on the back of her head and kept his breathing steady, the way he did when he needed the people around him to feel that the worst part was over. His wrists were still bleeding. He didn't wipe them. Corporal Fenton stepped inside the house with Darnell's permission and returned a minute later holding a military ID and a folded set of orders from the kitchen counter. He looked at the ID first. The photo matched. The name read Carter, Darnell A. The rank read Senior Chief Petty Officer. The branch read United States Navy. Below the ID in a leather folio were commendation letters, deployment records, and a summary of service that included Naval Special Warfare Group assignments spanning nearly 2 decades. Fenton's expression shifted as he read. He looked up at Darnell, sitting on the steps holding his daughter, wrists raw, grass stains on his shirt, and something tightened behind his eyes. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Corporal Fenton on scene at Maplewood Drive. The call is unfounded. Subject is the confirmed homeowner and an active-duty senior chief in the United States Navy. No violation, no crime. Repeat, no crime." There was a pause on the other end, then a quiet, "Copy." By the cruiser, Briggs leaned against the hood with his arms crossed. Sutton stood beside him, staring at the ground. Neither of them walked back toward the porch. Neither of them said a word. Karen Whitfield's front door closed softly. She had already gone inside. Victor Langley crossed the street and approached Darnell with his phone in hand. "Sir, I recorded the whole thing, every second. You need this." Darnell looked at him. "Thank you." Mr. Washington walked over slowly, Beverly beside him. His voice was low but firm. "She's done this before. To us. To the family who looked at this house before you bought it. They were a young Latino couple. She called the police on them during the open house. They didn't make an offer." Darnell looked at the Whitfield house. The blinds were closed. Beverly Washington added quietly, "Every black or brown person who steps foot on this street, she calls. Every single one. It's been years." Darnell said nothing. He just held Zoe tighter and looked at the blood drying on his wrists. Darnell carried Zoe inside and locked the front door. He sat her on the couch, turned on her favorite show, and told her he would be right back. She didn't want to let go of his arm. He knelt down and looked her in the eyes. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. Nobody is taking me anywhere." She let go slowly. He went to the kitchen sink and ran cold water over his wrists. The cuts weren't deep, but they stung. Thin lines where the metal had bitten into the skin when Briggs cinched the cuffs past what was needed. He dried his hands, sat down at the kitchen table, and picked up his phone. He didn't raise his voice, didn't pace, didn't slam anything. He called his commanding officer at Naval Special Warfare Command and reported what had happened in clear, precise language, the way he would report a mission debrief. The stop, the drawn weapon, the knee, the cuffs, the language, his daughter in the doorway. The CO listened without interrupting. When Darnell finished, the CO said 2 words, "Stand by." Within the hour, Naval Special Warfare Command Legal was notified and opened a file. NCIS received a formal referral and began a preliminary inquiry into the use of force against an active-duty Special Operations Service member on domestic soil. Darnell's CO made a second call, this one directly to the Lakewood Police Department's Chief of Police. The conversation was short. The tone was not friendly. Meanwhile, 6 miles away, Victor Langley sat in his living room and uploaded the video to 3 platforms. He didn't add commentary. He didn't need to. The footage showed everything. A black man on his knees with open hands, a weapon drawn, a knee driven into his back, cuffs snapped on while a 7-year-old screamed from the doorway, a woman standing at the edge of her yard with her arms crossed, watching, and one officer's voice, low but audible, saying, "People like you always have a story." By midnight, the video had been viewed over 500,000 times. By morning, it would pass 1 million, and the phones in offices that Briggs and Whitfield had never heard of were already starting to ring. The investigation moved fast. Internal Affairs pulled body camera footage from all 3 officers by Monday morning. Corporal Fenton's camera told the full story. It showed Darnell stepping forward with open hands. It showed Briggs drawing his weapon at 20 feet. It showed the takedown, the knee, the cuffs, the child screaming in the doorway. It captured Briggs' voice saying, "People like you always have a story." The audio was clean. The footage was unbroken. There was nothing to dispute. Officer Sutton's camera was partial. Her angle caught voices but missed the physical contact during the takedown. It showed her blocking the door but cut away before Zoe ran to her father. Useful, but incomplete. Officer Briggs' camera recorded nothing. According to his report, the device malfunctioned during the call. Internal Affairs noted this was the 3rd time in 2 years Briggs' camera had failed during a use-of-force incident. The 911 call audio was reviewed next. Karen Whitfield's words were clear on the recording. Suspicious black male, could be armed, child inside who might be in danger. None of it was true. The mention of a weapon and a child in danger had directly escalated the dispatch priority and shaped how Briggs approached the scene. The district attorney's office flagged the call as potentially criminal. By midweek, the DOJ Civil Rights Division had been contacted and assigned a team. The Pentagon issued a formal inquiry requesting all footage, dispatch records, and officer service files. NCIS expanded its review into a full investigation. Darnell retained a civil rights attorney named Adrienne Caldwell. She reviewed the evidence in one sitting and told him this case would not be quiet. Investigators pulled Karen Whitfield's full 911 history the same week. In 6 months, she had placed 8 calls connected to Darnell's property. A plumber's van, a friend waiting in a parked car, a Friday evening barbecue. 8 calls, 8 dispatches, 0 violations, 0 crimes. They went back further. Over 5 years, Karen had made 14 additional 911 calls involving black or brown individuals on or near Maplewood Drive. A black delivery driver reported as casing houses. A brown teenager on a bicycle reported as suspicious. A black real estate agent reported as an unknown male going door to door. Every call unsubstantiated. Every subject a person of color. Not once had she called about a white person on her street. HOA emails surfaced next. In one, Karen wrote that the board needed to think carefully about the kind of people purchasing in the community. In another, she referenced maintaining the standards that made this neighborhood desirable. She never used the word race. She never had to. A former neighbor contacted investigators after seeing the viral video. Luis and Maria Flores, a Latino couple who had lived on the street for 3 years, described constant police calls, HOA complaints about their yard and front door color, and anonymous notes on their car. One read, "You don't belong here." They moved because fighting was no longer worth it. Karen was interviewed in her living room. Gerald sat beside her in silence. She said she was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe. When investigators asked her to name one specific crime she had ever seen Darnell Carter commit, she couldn't. The investigator closed his notebook. The record said everything she wouldn't. The outcomes came within 2 months. Officer Ryan Briggs was terminated on 5 counts. Excessive force, failure to de-escalate, failure to verify residency, racial bias indicators in his conduct, and suspicious body camera failure, the 3rd such failure in 2 years, a pattern the department could no longer ignore. His law enforcement certification was revoked by the state board. He was barred from working in any policing capacity in the state. Officer Dana Sutton was suspended without pay and demoted for failure to intervene during a use of force she knew was unjustified. Before the disciplinary process concluded, she submitted her resignation. No statement, no apology. She was gone within a week. Corporal James Fenton received a formal commendation for his intervention on scene. In a private conversation with a fellow officer, he said it should have come sooner. I watched too long. 2 supervisors who had previously dismissed complaints against Briggs were placed under internal review. One had signed off on the dismissal of all 4 prior excessive force complaints. The other had approved Briggs's return to active duty after each incident without requiring retraining. Both were suspended pending the outcome. The Lakewood Police Department entered into a federal consent decree requiring mandatory de-escalation training, independent body camera auditing, civilian oversight of use of force incidents, and quarterly reporting on racial disparities in police contact. Karen Whitfield was charged by the district attorney with filing a false police report and making a false emergency claim involving a weapon. Both were misdemeanors. Both carried potential jail time. But the charges didn't stop there. After reviewing her full 911 history, the pattern of calls targeting Black and brown residents, and the HOA emails referencing the kind of people moving into the neighborhood, federal prosecutors added a charge of conspiracy to deprive civil rights under color of law. The trial lasted 4 days. Karen testified she was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe. Prosecutors played the 911 audio. They presented the 22 unsubstantiated calls. They read her emails to the HOA. They called Luis Flores to the stand, who described the anonymous notes, the constant police visits, and the day his wife told him she didn't feel safe in her own home anymore. The jury convicted Karen on all counts. She was sentenced to 14 months in federal prison and 3 years of supervised release. The Maplewood Estates HOA was named as a co-defendant in the civil lawsuit for enabling and failing to address years of discriminatory conduct documented in their own email records. Darnell's civil rights lawsuit against the city, the officers, and Karen Whitfield was settled before trial. The amount was in the 7 figures. The settlement included mandated department reforms, the creation of an independent civilian oversight board, and a formal public apology issued by the city. Darnell didn't attend the press conference. He was at home with Zoe. The basketball hoop went up on a Sunday morning. Darnell tightened the last bolt, stepped back, and bounced the ball once on the driveway before passing it to Zoe. She caught it with both hands, lined up her shot the way he had taught her, and missed wide. She laughed. He rebounded it and passed it back. She shot again. This time, it hit the rim. That afternoon, James and Beverly Washington walked across the street carrying foil-covered dishes. Darnell had the grill going in the backyard. Zoe showed Beverly her new hoop. James handed Darnell a bottle of sauce and said, "Welcome to the street. For real this time." Karen Whitfield's house sat empty. A for sale sign stood in the front yard. The blinds were drawn. She would not be returning. Darnell didn't talk about her. He didn't talk about Briggs or Sutton or the cuffs or the lawn, not to the neighbors, not to the press. He had said what he needed to say in his statements, in the courtroom, and in the evidence. That was enough. He used a portion of the settlement to establish a legal defense fund for victims of racially motivated false police reports, people who had been swatted, targeted, and terrorized by neighbors who weaponized 911 and knew exactly what they were doing. He partnered with Adrian Caldwell to build a network of attorneys willing to take those cases. A few weeks later, his commanding officer called. "Darnell, you handled it like a SEAL." Darnell looked through the kitchen window at Zoe shooting baskets in the driveway, the hoop he had been building the day they put him on the ground. "I handled it like her father." The final frame of the body camera footage would circulate for months. A decorated war hero, face down on his own front lawn, wrists cuffed behind his back, his 7-year-old daughter screaming 10 feet away. Underneath it, in every article, every training bulletin, every courtroom exhibit, the same words appeared. This is what unchecked bias looks like.